Hello my friends, herzlich willkommen. In a previous video we've been exploring the principle of worked hours versus payable hours in time card calculations. Today we're looking at a totally different way on managing time cards for cast and on-set crew, which is very common in Germany, the time account. Arbeitszeitkonto. Isn't German a beautiful language? Alright, but that's where my little friend comes in. My piggy bank. So this is my piggy bank, and let's call her Gretchen, okay? So Gretchen is going to assist me today. So you could say typical German, instead of spending all the money right away each week, they're collecting these additional hours worked in a time account, like credits, right? Sounds complicated? Well, yes, of course it's complicated. It's German, all right? But no worries. In this video, I will show you that there are good reasons for a time account, especially for production workers in the German film industry. So here's another video for all your hardworking people on set and at the production office. And today's topic is managing time accounts for German crew. Let's first talk about the background of the time account, and of course it is related to Germany's social security system, especially to the 5 pillars of social insurances: the health insurance, the pension insurance, the unemployment insurance, the long-term care insurance, and the accident insurance. All those 5 insurances are mandatory, by the way. So that means, like, for example, if you're not able to work, you might be eligible for unemployment insurance, meaning for unemployment benefits. But of course, in order to become eligible, first you need to pay into and contribute to the unemployment insurance. So that means there are certain conditions you need to meet. For example, in a time span of 30 months, you might need to prove that you have worked in total, like at least 12 months, in a job that is contributing to Social Security. And as we know, that's not so easy for production workers and for talent to kind of prove and show this kind of continuous amount and period of employment, especially during the winter where you might be on hiatus because there's simply not enough projects. And that's the reason why there is the time account, not only, by the way, for the film industry. It's kind of a general concept in the German system, but it means that you can use additional work to kind of collect credits in a time account, and then later this is converted into additional Social Security contributing days, like sozialversicherungspflichtige Arbeitstage. So let's take a look in Yamdu what we can do with such a time account. So here I'm in the personal time cards of Nathalie Farmer. Nathalie is an on-set dresser, and of course for her we have the time account features activated. So you see already here in the current stats of the personal time card that there are things like the worked hours, etc., that we already know, but there's something new, like the time account credit, like here, like plus 19 something, and it's kind of red, right? So plus in the time account credit, of course, means for the production company, and that is the perspective of the production company, that you have to pay something in addition, and that is kind of those additional Social Security related days. So let's see in her profile where we kind of can set up all those things. So the first thing you notice is that for her, we have as a labor agreement template, the German regulations template, the Verdi template. So you can activate and find this template by clicking here, select a template, and it's available for all Yamdu customers. There are also different other templates for Austria, for Italy, etc., but in this case, let's choose the German one. Now, of course, this pre-populates her profile, and of course, we also see Verdi as a union. So Verdi is the big union for production workers, but of course also for a lot of other types of industries, and you can click here if you want to learn more about the union itself. Now, of course, this also pre-populates my contracted work time. So it's important, this is like for a regular standard 5-day week. Of course, you can also edit all this, for example, for a 4-day week. But in this case, let's say we have the 40 base hours, which is kind of standard in Germany, and the additional 10 hours that are covered by this particular agreement and contract, which are considered to be overtime, but they're already covered. And we will see later on that there are not yet any surcharges. So for 5 working days per week, we get the 8 hours of base and then the guaranteed overtime hours of 2 additional hours per day. What's very special is, as you can see here, there's the feature enabled that a minimum worked hours per working day are always paid. In this case, it's the base hours, not the base hours plus the guaranteed overtime hours, which is the 8 hours. This means that Nathalie, our production worker, always gets paid 8 hours. So even if we have a very short shooting day of only 5-6 hours or something, she always gets paid at least the 8 hours according to the contracted work time. So the rate type is usually a weekly rate. Of course, you could also enter daily rates, and it will auto calculate, for example, the hourly rate. Now, what's very important down below is that the time account itself is actually enabled, because this provides us with new features, especially that we can use little Gretchen here in our Yamdu account. And it already tells you that certain things end up in the time account, and such credits are then kind of collected until you have a certain amount of hours that can then be converted into an additional Social Security day. In this case, it's the standard setting of 8 hours, which provide you with 1 additional day. And there's even a rule for rounding up, like from 4 hours onwards, to already provide you with 1 additional day. So let's see what this means in the time card. We can see Nathalie has 2 additional columns, the time account variance column and the supplement column. We will get to the supplements later on. Let's first focus on the time account variance. So we see here she has 10 hours as worked hours, and that comes like from her work start. Here, like every day, Monday through Friday, is 8 o'clock in the morning, and then the work end is 18:45, right? Of course, you could switch also from the 24-hour format to the AM/PM format, but obviously here we prefer the 24-hour format. Now, you might ask yourself, wait a sec, from 8 until 18:45, that's not 10 hours, that's 10 hours and 45 minutes. Why is that? Well, you see here we have meal 1 start and meal 1 end, but nothing has been entered. It's empty. But there's something in place called auto deduction. It's pretty common in Germany. So we just scroll to the left to the salary section, and there you get the explanation. So as an estimated salary, she has like the earnings of 400 euros for the 10 hours. But on top here, you can see it says meal 1 auto deduction is active, like 45 minutes have been automatically deducted from the worked hours. So let's have a closer look at this setting first, because it's kind of the base for all the calculations we will see later on. And let's scroll down to meal 1. Of course, there is meal 1, and have the auto deduction activated. So it literally tells you automatically deduct meal duration from worked hours if no meal 1 times have been entered. So that means Nathalie, or a production worker, a user, can still enter meal 1 start and end times. And if they do so, then actually Yamdu will take those times and use it for the calculations. But if no times for the meal break have been entered, then auto deduction is used for the calculation instead. Of course, as in most other countries, the meal breaks do not count as work times, and then the minimum duration is 45 minutes. There actually is a required meal 1 start time, also like 6 hours after like your work start. But as there are no meal penalties in place, it also does not really affect the calculations. And of course, things like grace or extension do simply not exist. As you can see, you could also enable exactly the same settings for a meal 2, but as we will see later on, due to the labor agreement regulations, it's not so easy to actually have such long days in Germany that would require a meal 2. But of course, if your production or on certain days you need a second meal, well, just enable it here, and then people can also enter their times for meal 2. So as we're already here, let's scroll up to the actually fun part, right? The overtime. So as you can already see, there are no special weekdays. Well, do Germans not have like special weekdays like Saturday, Sunday, 6th day, 7th day? Well, there are certain things like this and they're quite similar, but then they also work a bit different, of course. So we will take a look at this later on. Let's first focus on a regular day. So of course we have the base time with a factor of 1x, right? So there's no surcharge. My first until the 8th hour are just collected in 15-minute increments, and we also round half up. So this actually means that Nathalie is actually working like the 8 hours, right? So we have those 8 work hours here, and each white ball reflects like 1 hour worked, and we have our 8 base hours. So the question, of course, is what does this mean? Well, it means 8 hours payable, right? So I just stand up here. It's quite a lot of work to show you labor agreements. So we also have like as payable hours, our 8 hours over here, like 4 and then 6. And that's the 8 hours that you're always getting paid. It's the base hours. And that means she gets paid immediately, right? Nothing to do with the time account. So this is similar to payable hours. But then we also have those 2 additional hours, the 9th and the 10th hour. So let's have Nathalie work 2 more hours, the 9th and the 10th hour. As you can see, there is a factor of 1x, again, the 15-minute increments, and we round half up. And again, as this is already covered by our contract, as we've seen before, right? It's very simple that also this is part of her regular salary, and we just add those 2 additional hours. Shows she's getting paid for the 10 hours. So far, so good, quite simple, right? So now it gets more interesting with OT2, right? Because now we see 1.25x 25% surcharge. And this means Nathalie is now working an 11th hour. So let's add this 11th hour here. As soon as Nathalie enters the 11th hour, we already have to pay the 11th hour, but not only like this 1 hour, but like a surcharge of 25%. And this is now something that goes into the time account. So we have this additional special payable hour, or let's say this credit of 1.25 hours actually, that go right into the time account. So, and then we see here there could potentially be a 12th hour, right? So the next one, which is then in OT3, 1.5x or a surcharge of 50%. And that's 1.5x, so 50% plus that goes as a credit into the time account. Thank you, Gretchen. So potentially you could work longer, you think, right? Well, not so fast, because you can see here in OT4 that might be surprising for you that a 13th hour is actually not allowed. It's literally illegal. So that's why Yamdu has the option here to say not allowed. So also it does not count, of course, in the calculations, and actually there will be a warning in the time card itself. All right, and as you can see here, you also have this feature time account, and then it says, yes, add payable overtime hours to the time account. So that means like those additional hours that have factors like OT2 and OT3 that are not part of my guaranteed overtime hours, they actually go into the time account. They do not count as payable hours and also not as supplements, as we will see in a minute what that actually means. So let's go back to Nathalie's time card. Let's assume like for Monday, we switch the work end to 1945. So 1 additional hour, which is actually our 11th hour. So of course, then we have 11 worked hours, and that gives us 1.25 hourly credits for our time account, and that's why it appears in the time account variance. If we click on it, we also see the explanation of the calculation, and again, of course, the hint that the 45 minutes of the meal have already been deducted. And now let's change Nathalie's work start time to 8:30. That means she works half an hour less, 10.5 hours, but she still has entered the 11th hour, and you see that Yamdu only considers that additional half hour for the time account credit, and you see here the half an hour, and only the fraction is considered. But let's now switch it back to 8 o'clock, and then let's have her work 12 hours, and then obviously this gives me 2.75 hourly credits for the time account, OT2 and OT3. By the way, as you can see, nothing is updated up here in the current stats. Why? Because this only considers time cards that have been validated and approved. So we will see, of course, like those additional credits will be added to the time account credit current stats, but let's take a look at this later on. Now let's move on and maybe prolong her additional days, right? The Tuesday, the Wednesday, and as we can see, it's always adding like credits to the time account variance column. And now let's see what happens. All right, so we always have now 12 hours worked, but on Friday, all of a sudden, we also have only worked 12 hours, but it's 13.75. Why is that? Well, we see something new here. It's called the weekly overtime threshold. Oh my God, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at the weekly overtime threshold. As you can see here, there is an option enabled called weekly overtime threshold. And it literally means if you work like on a weekly basis beyond a certain amount of hours, in this case for threshold 1, it's 50 hours, then another penalty rate is triggered, and it's a factor of 1.25x or 25% surcharge. So don't get confused in the labor agreement. Sometimes you also read something like 51 hours, etc., but you literally have to read it for like beyond a certain threshold. So it's beyond the 50th hour. Well, of course, that's the 40 hours base and then the 10 additional hours. So beyond those 50 hours per 1 week, we have an additional factor, and also for a second threshold beyond 55 hours per week. Those rates are not compounded, but they rather overwrite the daily overtime. So that's an important rule. So if you have weekly overtime, that always overwrites the daily overtime. So you don't charge both at the same time. If they occur at the same time, weekly overtime always overrules daily overtime. But of course, it also is getting added to the time account. So it's very important that daily and weekly overtime are getting added to the time account. So in this case, I can actually add like 13 or something more hours to my little piggy bank. I'm not doing like all of this, right? But you get it. So that's how you also collect credits in the time account when it comes from weekly overtime. And again, of course, we see in the batch everything together for this entire work week. And we also can click on the batch details and again, see kind of a list of all those time account variances and additional credits. So what is the column supplements for? So that's kind of important to distinguish. Like we said, daily and weekly overtime go into the time account, but there are also other premiums that actually go into supplements. And supplements are very similar to the payable hours. They kind of get paid out to the production worker or to the talent immediately each week or each month, right? Just like the regular salary. So it is comparable to payable hours, but it's still collected in this special column of supplements, and we will see what ends up here in a second. But first, let's take a look at rest periods, because they're also very, very important in Germany. So for example, let's have Nathalie work until 11, and maybe on that day, let's just have her start at 11 as well. But the next day on Tuesday, we have work start at 8 a.m., right? Or at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there's a little warning. The rest period might have been violated because the turnaround time is set to 11 hours, which is standard for this labor agreement, like as a daily minimum rest period. But obviously it is only 9 hours, so that's not allowed. And basically we have to start working later on, and that of course eliminates the conflict. So let's go to Nathalie's details in the payroll and labor agreement settings, and let's scroll down to rest periods, and there you can see minimum daily rest period 11 hours. Of course, there are also weekly rest periods kind of between 2 working weeks, but what we just saw here as an example came from the 11 hours as minimum daily rest period. As you can see, there are no penalties in place because it's simply not allowed if you do not provide enough turnaround time for your production workers and talent. So now let's do something else. Let's kind of prolong Monday until 11:45 in the evening. Also change the other work start time so we don't have a problem with rest periods. But now obviously we're working during the night. And this gives us now supplements. And it's 17 euros and 50 cents. And here if we click on this, we also get the explanations because it's 25% of the hourly rate of 1.75 hours. And still, as we can see here for the time account variance, nothing has changed because we still have like those 12 hours and it's still the same time credit for the time account variance. But in addition, we get supplements. So let's go to the details and see where this comes from. Of course, also the German labor agreement knows something like night premiums. And there's only one NP1 and it's like between 10 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning the next day is considered to be a night shift. And there is like this factor of 0.25x or 25% surcharge. Again, it's like in 50-minute increments and rounded half up. But what's important for the time account, it's not even added to the time account, it's added to those supplement payments. And that's a very important difference. So it literally means that now Nathalie might have worked like 1 hour during nighttime, right? But this counts then as like a fraction. Just the 25% surcharge matters because like this 1 hour worked might already be covered by the regular working hours, right? But now we get kind of this little night premium surcharge into our supplements. And I said before, this is similar to the principle of the payable hours. So that actually means we have something that we get money-wise immediately. In this case, it's 17 euros and 50 cents. And you could also see here in the weekly batch, it clearly states the supplements. And of course, also if I click on show all batch details. Now let's make it a long week. So we actually add shooting days here for the Saturday. So of course, we are still already in the weekly overtime threshold. So that explains my time account variance and the credits for each hour worked. But as you can see, there are also 80 euros of supplements, and they are activated because of the additional weekday one premiums, which is the premiums for the Saturday. And here we also see it clearly flagged as a 6th day. So that means you can potentially also work like, for example, on something like a Saturday, like a weekend day one, right? And again, if something is triggered as a premium, this does not go into the time account, but in this case, for example, it rather goes like as an additional premium, in this case, like those 25% surcharge, again, to the supplements, which means you get immediately paid for that in a particular week. So before we go into the settings, let's just see like if we switch the Monday to a day off, and then like the day type for the Saturday is simply flagged as weekend day one. So it's still a Saturday, but it's not the 6th day anymore. But you also see that we still have, of course, the 80 euros of supplements, right? The time account variance has changed because as Monday is now off, obviously we don't reach the weekly threshold, so don't get confused. We just focus here on the supplements. But now let's also say also Sunday. We work on Sunday, but then maybe it's not that long of a day. And let's take a look. So now as we reactivated Monday, of course, as a work, and we're also working like the entire week, including Saturday and Sunday, we have those flagged as a 6th and 7th day. And then for the Sunday, you even see additional supplements of 240 euros. So we have the 80 euros on the Saturday because it's the additional weekend day one. And then we have the additional supplements on weekend day two, this Sunday as being the 7th day. So we get supplement premiums here, right? So if I want to express this here, basically I will add more of those green balls. But let's do now the following, and that's where it's getting special. Let's again turn Monday off. So it's an off day, right? Let's also turn Tuesday off. So this means like Saturday and Sunday are now just turned into weekend day one and weekend day two. They're not the 6th and 7th day anymore. And all of a sudden you see for weekend day two, for the Sunday, the supplements are gone. But for Saturday, we still have them. That is strange, right? So let's go into the settings. So remember, we don't have special working days. Everything is kind of like the regular day in here. But of course, as we keep scrolling down, we do have specialties here. So it's the additional weekday one premium. Weekday one is the Saturday according to our project settings, because in Germany, the weekend is Saturday, Sunday. And as you can see here, for weekend day one, it says if it's the first or fifth day, you get 25% for each hour worked as a surcharge. And then for the weekend day one being the sixth or seventh day, the same. Also, the 25%. Remember this little green ball. And it is compounded with other premiums, and those premiums are added to supplement and penalty payments. They do not go into the time account. So that means if working on a Saturday, you always get like those extra 25%, right? But just a fraction thereof. So it's 0.25x as a factor. And as you can see, there is something similar for the additional weekend day two premium. So that's our Sunday, right? And there you can see that if the Sunday is the first through the fifth day, there is no surcharge. It's not applicable, right? But if you work on Sunday and it's actually the sixth or seventh day of a week, then all of a sudden it's 75% as a surcharge. So that's basically what we saw before with the 240 euros. Basically, again, as a supplement, you can see here it's added to supplements. We get kind of those 75% surcharge of all the hours worked, but only if the Sunday is the sixth or seventh day of working in a week. So this is strange, you might say, right? So that means you always have to pay extra as a production company if you call in people on a Saturday. But if you call them in on a Sunday, it really depends on like the previous working days of that week. Was it the first, second, and so on, fifth day, or actually the sixth or seventh day? Not so fast, because if we scroll down a bit, there's something else. And it's called enable compensation days. Well, this means for certain days, like certain public holidays, but also for the weekend day two, the Sunday, you always get one additional compensation day. And this is even like an extra category, right? So you collect additional compensation days for each working week where you have kind of worked on particular public holidays or on a Sunday. So that is something you always get, no matter if you work on a Sunday and that's like the fifth day, or if it is the Sunday and it's also the sixth and seventh day. So let's take a look maybe here at the show batch details that we also collect like one additional compensation day because we've been working on a Sunday. So we just touched, because of the compensation days, the topic of holidays. Of course, there are also special regulations for holidays. So you also define public holidays here. And of course, there's the calendar integration. And you have to be aware that different states in Germany, there are the 16 states, you might have different public holidays. So you can always check here and choose and select those holidays that actually apply as, being something that is considered for premiums. But you see, like, the overtime categories are exactly the same as on a regular day. And of course, also the 13th hour is not allowed, etc., etc. But there's something, of course, again, additional, the additional holiday premiums. So that means, very similar to a Sunday, that if you work on a public holiday and it's the first through fifth day, there is no extra surcharge talking or speaking about these supplements. But if it's the sixth or seventh day, there's actually a surcharge of 100%, right? So each hour worked is then actually counting twice when it comes to the supplement payments. And then, of course, if we go down to the compensation days, for certain public holidays, you also get additional compensation days, no matter how many hours you have worked on that particular day. Oh, and then there's one more thing, right? Work time reduction credit. All right, so let's take a look at this. So the work time reduction days come into place if you have like longer production, longer feature films, serialized production. Again, you collect something else. So as you can see, Germans are really crazy about collecting things, right? So you're collecting entitlements in certain increments like a day. But this only matters if the minimum employment period during a project is at least 5 days. That's at least the standard setting. What will happen then, there are new entitlement intervals. And it means for each 1 day worked, you can collect half an hour as an entitlement credit for the work time reduction days. Out of those half-hour intervals, if you have a total of 10 hours, you're granted 1 work time reduction day. So that means basically you have to collect 20 of such little intervals, which means like work 20 days, right? And then you're entitled to 1 work time reduction day. As this is quite new and quite complicated for a lot of people, and you have to check if this really matters for your production company, you should check in with a payroll specialist to learn more. But be aware that this is also part of the labor agreement, and it's active since May of the year 2025. Last but not least, you might want to export. There are various exports for PDF, for Excel. I just show you one here. So for this particular week, we want to run a PDF export. And of course, everything you see in Yamdo's time cards and the web application, you can also see and export in a PDF and then, for example, print it out or have it for your records. So you thought Germans are only good for playing villains, huh? That's not true. At least not entirely. And I think Gretchen has done a wonderful job showing us like more about the social security system of Germany and also the beloved time account, right? Well, Gretchen, but I think now time has come to actually dissolve the time account and convert it into social security days, shall we? Well, of course, no, I can't do this. Let's have Gretchen have fun, and she should collect and keep on collecting time account credits forever, shall we? All right, if you think this video was useful, please click like and subscribe. And always remember, she works hard for the money.